Welcome to The Teacher's Story. I'm Jackie Scully. This is a podcast to elevate teacher voice. In this program, you will hear teachers sharing their journey into this profession and their ideas for education. I'm kicking it off Teacher Appreciation Week, which starts May 2nd. This is about honest, vulnerable, inspiring storytelling. It's a time and a space for teachers to share their ideas for the future of education. Teachers are beautiful beings who give their heart and soul to their community. They're innovators, they're inspirational, not only to children, but to the people around them. And they deserve to share their voice. So welcome to The Teacher's Story. Enjoy. Hi, welcome to The Teacher's Story. This is Jackie Scully, and we have Helene Beck with us, fellow podcaster, and I was also on her podcast, Coming from the Heart. It's an awesome one. Check it out. We'll plug more about that towards the end. And so we have Helene here to talk about her days in teaching, but also how she transitioned out and what she's doing now and how she views kind of education and, her views of like maybe some of the people she's had on her podcast too. And we'll share that at the end there. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Jackie. You're awesome. I love talking to you a week ago. It's weird how our podcast sort of lapsed a little bit. I know it's so hard to connect with people in life, and especially in general. And I know you're a teacher and you're busy and I'm busy. So thank you for having me on the podcast. It's it's an honor to be here. So thank you. So teaching, interesting. Yes. Teaching I'm pausing here because I'm thinking has been part of my life forever, since the time I was a little child. My parents were educators. My dad was a school principal. Prior to that, he was a school teacher, fifth grade teacher. My mom was a teacher. She morphed into that later in her life. And I believe that it was sort of just part of who I was. I mean, I went to school for textile design, marketing, and business, but I used to always be the substitute teacher in my dad's school. I was the one that he would call me even when I was in between my semesters in college. Can you teach gym? And I would be like, sure, Dad. I have to wake up at 4:00 in the morning and drive from Maryland or Washington, but I'll be there. And I was. And it just was just a really, really big part of my life. I lived in my mother's classroom. My mother was a kindergarten, then reading recovery teacher. She did a modality. It was Marie Clay's modality of teaching children who were pretty much illiterate to read. And I always admired what my parents did. Like many kids, I was like, oh, I don't want to go into that world because mom and dad did that, ... And then years later, after working in the fashion industry, I was in sales and merchandising and all over the country doing a lot of the stuff that I was doing, working for pretty large manufacturers out there in the men's world. My job kept getting downsized. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do? So I was really exceptionally, there's the word, fortunate to go back on a grant to get my master's for teaching. It was called Trade Readjustment Act. And back in the day, I'll date myself here, it was during the Clinton administration, where if you were laid off in certain types of jobs, and let me explain, my job as a merchandiser is when I was receiving product really from all over the world and servicing that product into stores. For an example, like China, a lot of my product, I work for Chaps or Christian Dior in the men's world was not domestic. And what happened is because things changed, the market changed, things changed, my job kept getting downsized. So at that point, I think I had lost my job and I was like, okay, let me take on a new entity. So what I knew best was teaching from, but having my parents as these incredible mentors. Maybe I'll go into that world. And my mom's best friend, who taught in an inner city school in Atlantic City, Medina, who I absolutely adore to this day, was an ESL teacher. And my mother and her were very good friends. And my mom was like, just come in, observe, see what you think. Well, she was beyond this phenomenal human. And forget about as a teacher, I was like, yes, this is what I want to do. So I always had a flair for languages, not that you need to do that in ESL, but the love of speaking English well or writing. I didn't know anything about any of this until clearly I went back for the master's program. So I went back for the master's program. It was actually right around before I had my daughter. So it was like 97. And I went to Fairleigh Dickinson University in Teaneck, went through their 2-year program. But let me get back to the Trade Readjustment Act. I was able, through this particular act, this program they had, to reboot my career, basically what it was, that I would be able to go cost, not at any cost to me, where I would be able to attend a university of my choice. So not only did I have that, but they included my books and everything else that I was doing in that 2-year. Yeah. Imagine you're getting a free master's. I mean,
that's
yes,
amazing.
It was incredible. I don't believe I would have done it, the going back to school and all of it, if it hadn't been literally placed in my lap. I received this letter when I was sort of let go from one of my other divisions when I was working in the garment center in the textile world, that described this program. Back in the day, computers were not what they were today. And it was like, okay, you need to write an essay describing basically why do you want to do this? Why do you want to go into education? And I pretty much said exactly what I'm telling you today, the why and the how. My passion for learning, my passion that I've always was in this world because of my parents. And it sort of was this DNA thing that I had this connection to always want to educate. Even when I was in textiles and design, when I would go around to do product development, I was always teaching. There was always this teaching component, this thread. And I really felt that I was missing I don't know how to say the excitement, but the connection of really giving this passion that I had for teaching to others. And I wasn't being fulfilled really in what I was doing in that textile world. So there went the educational trajectory. 2 years later, plus I got my master's, and I started off slow. I really was thinking at that time, going into the adult learning world, because I had a young baby. I had a young family. My daughter was just born. I didn't know if I could really do the full-time gig. So I started really doing adjunct. And, going into ESL really is accredited to my mom's friend, Medina, because she just explored this world with me that I just knew nothing of. It was just this whole other component of working with international friends and international students. And when I started, it was like boot camp. When I first came out, when I was going through my apprenticeship and stuff, when I was at Fairleigh, I had classes of like 40 plus, leveled all over the hell place, all in one room, wanting to learn English. And I had great mentors at the time. And I really, really learned just into the trenches of that. And from that, I went on to teaching as an adjunct at Kane University, Felician College. Kane, I did a lot of continuing education. Then I taught in their undergrad program as well for ESL. And I sort of morphed and grew in this whole spectrum of adult learning. And then went on to, I keep talking here, so you can stop me whenever you want.
No, I love the passion.
When I went into, so I really went from ESL adult, really, let me backpedal. It was continuing education. It was undergraduate, adjunct, working at Kane, Felician, etc., and some other schools along the way, working at a Korean school, getting all this experience, then landing eventually into the elementary sector. But while I was doing that, I was also teaching at Stevens Institute of Technology as an adjunct. So I kind of always had my hand in like the adult world.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, you know what? I wanted to explore education with kids. I never had done that except for substitute teaching with my parents and all that stuff. So I taught at Greenbrook Township schools for 4 years, developed their curriculum, and got tenure. And then Chris Christie cut the budget.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Was that during the recession?
Oh gosh, what year was that, Jackie?
2008.
Something like that. Yeah. And then I was like, oh no, I have my job. I'm getting paid half my salary. I was still very connected to Stevens because I was doing adjunct work. I kind of never left that world because I love that world. So I would teach my half day classes and then go teach grad school at night. So I was kind of flexing between the two. But prior to that, I had the full-time ESL job. That's when I was initially hired. So yeah, it was a little crazy, but I stayed in that world, and my kids were young, and it was hard balancing, and I did all that
Mhm.
stuff. And then later I went back to Stevens as a full-time assistant director. And that's kind of really where I landed about, well, I've been out of that world now. It's almost 4 years,
Mm.
doing that whole gig, working with international grads, assessing TOEFL, IELTS, administrative, the whole
Wow.
bit, working and Skyping the world of PhD, master people coming into advanced programs. So, teaching and interviewing and all that stuff has been, it's funny that we're even talking about this today, because I actually just reached out to the superintendent of schools in Weehawken. Give a
Mm.
shout out to them for a moment for just for, I'm not even sure what I want to be doing there. More of a consultant, more of an
Mm.
opportunity in the mental health space, advocacy, and
Yeah.
also bringing the teaching aspect to that world as well. So
Yeah.
that's me.
You
That's
have
all.
been around the block a few times. That's so
Yeah.
cool. I love when people share that teaching was their second career because there's always like a different kind of vibe. Like the passion is so rich. Like when people go back to school and they choose teaching as their second career and they come into it, like they have a new set of eyes because like I think there are people going to like corporate world and other spaces and they could be making really good money, until there's downsizing and whatnot. And then they're just like, but there's something that's not pulling at my heartstrings, or I feel like I have a deeper purpose. And then people might go into education and they feel it. They feel the purpose. They feel the connection. I mean, it is a human profession. That's kind of what's kept me in it for so long, is that on a daily basis, you're connecting with kids, with other adults on such a personal level. It doesn't even matter what subject you're teaching. Like you are mentoring people. And I've never worked with adults, but I've always been fascinated by it because um, I think just being able to like be part of someone's life at a very pivotal moment, especially helping them learn English and become successful and gain their degree and all of that. And I've done some ESL work in China. I taught in a summer camp, and then I had a lot of students in Hawaii. I wasn't an ESL teacher there, but I worked very closely with the ESL teacher in my classroom. And oh my gosh, I loved those teachers. They were just so, so passionate and like very connected with the kids. Like, because you're not just helping them with language, you're really getting to know their culture, their background, you're building like bonds maybe with their own kind of community and family. And so I love that space so, so much. So that is quite a road. And that you kind of came back to, how your parents inspired you. It's
Oh
funny,
no.
my mom, she was a nurse and my dad's a social worker. They worked with kids, but like both very difficult jobs. They both wanted me to go into their professions. And I'm like, Mom, Dad, if I go work as like a nurse in a hospital and see sick and dying children, or like putting kids in foster care or going through like, the court system with these families, like you're angels for doing it. I would be crying my eyes out on a regular basis. Like I can't, but I do want to work with kids. So like kind of similar to your story, my parents inspired me to be a mentor, to do something with young people, to do something with meaning and purpose. And that's always kind of like stayed with me. But yeah, I love this idea of the second career. And you've had so many roles, like so many different roles. And especially like
Yes.
the last part you were talking about, that's really neat to
Thank
be
you.
like connecting with so many students around the world. If there's any like stories or specific details of like anything that whether that's from like adult ed or even like your time with elementary ed, I think it's always fun to just kind of get that kind of like specific little
Yeah.
look into the classroom.
It's as you're speaking, I'm thinking, I think I left out when I did corporate ESL, because when I
Mm,
went into ESL for, working with K-8, I kind of wanted to fill the fill the circle, meaning, of course, do all aspects of
yeah.
ESL. So when I was doing continuing education, I I worked with pilots, which is
Mm,
crazy. International pilots flying out of Teterboro Airport and helping them with their language communication.
That's so cool.
And it's interesting because as I went along on my journey, yes, what truly is ESL? ESL, okay, people would look at you, oh, you speak so many languages. And I would say, no, I've picked up many different languages on the way, but I'm proficient in English. That's where I'm supporting you. I'm giving you modalities and pronunciations, exercises and all the different things that go into working with someone who has excessively limited English, whether it's the reading aspect, whether it's the pronunciation, whether it's syllable stress, etc. I mean, get into the technical on that, the linguistic aspect, but working with pilots was really cool too, because I was working with they were from Colombia and their English was so limited. And if I take a thread from the time that I first was working with these students in the continuing ed was I at Hackensack? That wasn't Hackensack University. Hackensack, what the heck was I? The continuing program at Hackensack Continuing Ed. I can't remember what their name exactly was. It didn't matter if I was working with 40 students or when I was teaching grad school at Stevens. Everybody has the same vulnerability, and everyone wants the same thing, to feel comfortable. And I believe that's, the joke was always like, oh, if you can't speak a language, just speak louder. That means I can really hear you better. And so I think there's so many myths of really what ESL is. I mean, when I was teaching grad school, it's English language communication courses. And that was at a higher level where students would be working on their pronunciation skills and their writing skills and their communication skills. But really, it's all about effective communication. Being able to communicate effectively, to be able to navigate your life, whatever that may be, whether if you're in a grad program and you're going on to advanced classes or corporate situations where I still connect to my students with some of the career stuff I'm doing now, or whether you're working with students who have very limited education, who just got to this country, but they want to be able to be comfortable. They want to be respected. And, so I just want to, put that out there.
That's great. That's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. And also I worked with students in my continuing ed at a restaurant. I used to go to a Mexican restaurant and teach English.
Oh, that's neat. So you're like right there in the community. Yeah.
So I was like doing all these things that maybe people are doing now or not doing that. But I say that my experience is excessively rich, very much so. So back to your question, or back to your, about a specific story that, if you want to repeat that.
Yeah, just like sometimes I like to ask, like, if there was like a moment or story about it, you don't have to give like specifics about a student, but maybe early on, sometimes there's like really neat kind of experiences. It could be challenging, it could be funny, it could be something that was like an aha moment. Or anything along your journey, in any of those like teaching kind of positions.
Yeah. I think, oh my gosh, I was
probably so many.
I've been in this world since like a dinosaur, like 20 plus years. I think one of the most challenging but incredible experiences is when I was at Stevens working as the assistant director, but I taught classes and so forth. I had two situations. One student had how do I say this? One student I worked with had a speech impediment, which was excessively challenging because here you are supporting the pronunciation aspect. Yeah. So we were dealing with that aspect. And I'll get to that in a second. And another situation is when one of the students I was working with had mental health challenges. He was from China. He was absolutely on the spectrum. I don't think he was classified really in China. That's a whole other story and situation that really doesn't happen very much. And he sort of went through the system. When I say go through this, meaning he was very bright. He was he was going for engineering. And I had him in a few of my classes because I would support other classes besides my own. And he had Asperger's and it was tough. Because again, he was never classified. He was never put into a situation to really support any of that. And yet I wanted to make sure, and you understand this as a teacher, that everybody in the classroom was getting equal time and equal space. And we laughed a lot, I would say, as a group. and almost, I wouldn't say we cried, but we felt for him in many situations. And he became this incredible human in the classroom because it was as if the students at that time, because of the way I presented the lesson and the way I went about doing things, and clearly that's not my expertise in that world, but we did the best we could to move forward with the class and the lesson. But the students became mentors with me as I was teaching the student, because he would, of course, someone who has Asperger's, he would just blurting stuff out, or, in a different situation. I think it may have been more difficult, maybe, let's say, for another teacher to handle the situation. But I also had experience when I was teaching elementary, where I worked in classrooms that kids were classified. So I kind of had that a little bit of experience. But as far as, a story to say that it enamored me, it touched my heart in so many ways, but also to the fact it wasn't just me, it was my class who became this superpower for him. So it was just, it was one of those moments where, whatever was going on, and we had projects and there was papers and all that stuff. He clearly never felt ostracized, because he could have been in that situation. There was probably about 25 kids in that class. And he became this like spokesperson for whatever group he was put into, because I set the situation and the boundaries to make him exceed. And it was amazing.
That's a great story. I love that. And it's like,
thank you.
When you see someone who could have what is looked at as a challenge, right? And especially if they come from a culture or a system where they don't have services. And so if you don't have the proper like paperwork and services, like the school can't really do anything for you. And that's the magic of a teacher being able to recognize when a student does need something, but you don't have anything on paper to do anything to help that student. But as a community, you could highlight what would be deemed as a challenge as something that's really special about, a student. One of my first years teaching in Hawaii, I had a child that had Asperger's. And because they were in our system and they had the classification, they had the student had a life coach that would go classroom to classroom. But I was kind of fortunate because he loved history. So he really liked coming to my class. Math was a whole nother thing. But the kids loved him. And the same thing, they were so good, because when he would show his brilliance in the way he would do it, it was just like, it was unique and interesting. And the kids really liked listening to the things he had to share. Again, he liked the content of the class. So he could probably recite the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, right? So it was like that kind of thing. But then you see it as a light. You see it as this thing that makes you special, and not like, oh, that just makes you other or ostracized. So that's a beautiful story, and how students can be the mentors themselves, and students can help us as teachers. I mean, it's like, we need it sometimes. It's like, I often tell my students, like, it's about the culture of this classroom that I am not just fostering. You are all fostering it. I can't do it on my own, and I can't just set a tone by myself. You are all here, and what you bring to the table is creating the classroom culture and allowing people to feel comfortable, to be themselves, to speak up, to share, to want to ask great questions or be curious. And yeah, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful story. And I'm sure that's something that will stay with you forever.
Oh my God. I mean, I can say his name. His name was Jonathan. I was thinking what was it? And again, you're dealing with adults. Okay. Because the students I had, remember, this is grad school. So they were probably 22, 23. So, it wasn't, I don't know if I would have had that response if I was sitting in a high school situation or not, but they definitely had the sophistication to be able to get what I was trying to do to make this community feel, to give this culture of the classroom where he was very much a part of it. And exactly what you were saying, Jackie, I utilized him to show his strength, to show the strength of what he could bring to the lesson, which was crazy often because of his abilities. So, it was amazing. So thank you for allowing me to remember that.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, as you're sharing about like the work you're doing, as you did in ESL, is that being in the language kind of field, did that have something to do with like wanting to become a podcaster and like want to sit down and like talk? Because it's all about communication, right? It's all about, you have to have good communication skills if you're going to start a podcast. So if you want to kind of talk about maybe your kind of segue from what you were doing, you said about 4 years ago, into like the work you've been doing now, and share anything about your podcast too.
Yeah, thank you. I love how you segued that because you're good too, because you're a podcaster. How do I start this? I believe that everything you do in your life, on your journey, whatever job it is, you just bring that to wherever you're going. I used to say that, or say that to my kids all the time. Oh, you may think that this experience isn't really going to, mean much, but it does, because it just kind of gives you this roadmap or these skill sets that you will use at a different time, but maybe in a different capacity. Teaching. Absolutely. I teach on the podcast. Every guest that comes on, it's a learning moment. It's a learning situation. I may not know the information. Most of the time I don't, but I will hopefully bring on experts who do, or talk about topics. I do collaborations on, I did a men's mental health, which is going to come out soon. I've done women's mental health matters. I've done sexual assault awareness, whatever I put my hands in. I'm going to do something with disabilities as well. I have a passion towards that, to be able to bring information forward. And that's the teacher in me, always wanting to educate. So when I sat down June 10th, 2020, pandemic was crazy. My life was insane. I had just been dealing with vertigo and not sure where I was going in my life. Moved down to South Jersey. There was a lot of transition and change going on with me, but I knew in my heart, from coming from the heart, of course, is the name of the podcast, that speaking, communication was something that I did obviously pretty, exceptionally, that I knew I could do something like this. I had the opportunity to interview hundreds of, probably thousands of scholars when I was at Stevens.
Wow.
And I'll explain, is that the scholars that were coming to the university had to go through my colleague and I for a language assessment, meaning that their language, obviously they need to be speaking English, and if they were speaking whatever they were speaking, had to be effective enough for them to be able to communicate effectively when they came to the United States. But the funny part of the irony is that often they were coming from India or China or wherever the heck they were. Germany, of course, was fine. They didn't really need support because their English is probably better than mine. Is that the departments, as soon as they got to Stevens or whatever they were doing, they were going to speak whatever they wanted to anyway. But it really, that component of my job was put into place because of 9/11, when at that time, schools, meaning institutions, schools, colleges, were sort of pulling back and going, okay, we really need to make sure when people are coming from another country, what is their purpose of coming? Why are they going to be here? So it was really through the state, or through that, I'm missing the terminology in my brain right now to think exactly what the program was, but it was put forth through, like I say, many universities. Stevens took that very seriously, where they wanted to make sure to reiterate that students, grad students, PhD students, masters, whatever they were coming, were going to be here for a purpose. They were going to be in the program. And when they were here, they needed to effectively be able to communicate. So that was really what that was about. So because of all that, that little component of the job became a larger component of my job, where my colleague and I had to implement, along with all the other responsibilities that we were doing as administrators and teaching, etc., and interview people from all over the world. So it was excessively time consuming at time for us to balance all that, but we sort of figured all that out. And because of that experience, when I left the university and then went off on my own and that, into podcasting, I had that ability to be able to have that and take that skill set with me. And that really kind of propelled me forward with a lot of the stuff that I was thinking about, or I thought about at the time with the podcast. But I really honestly sat down June 10th, 2020, with absolutely no experience in podcasting, never really listened to podcasts. My daughter was sort of my connection, or my informative to that. And I just went with it, knowing that I had experienced, or was experiencing, excuse me, a lot of mental health situation of my own with not even recognizing it. And I just wanted to reach out to people who may also have been going through challenging moments. And of course, the pandemic was going on. And that sort of was the incubation of it, to never feel alone, and to think about mindfulness, self-care, and all the other things that I bring to the platform.
Isn't it so much fun too? I love it. It's so much fun. And you're like, I love this, like these breadcrumbs that like have been on your path to get to what you're doing now. And I kind of resonate with that too. I actually was really into listening to podcasts, but kind of my like through line was listening to one particular podcaster on Expand It through TBM. And I just loved her voice. And I loved the way she felt so warm when she was connecting with her guests. And she felt like she was so into them. And I'm like, ooh, I just really like that. Like, I like that space. It just feels so good in my heart. And then I was talking to brokenhearted teachers over the pandemic. And I'm like, wait, we need a space like that. We need to like have a heart space. And there is something super cathartic about podcasting. It's so authentic for the most part. I'm sure there's ones out there that are just like businessy, whatnot. But I have found since doing it since 2022 that I'm listening and finding more and more authentic podcasts, and the hosts that are interviewing are so genuine, and they really, really connect with their guests, and they're doing it because they care about highlighting their guests and like sharing their story. And I feel like this is a great media to be, absorbing. I talk about it often with my students. I'm like, I mean, the news is just like, whatever, it's crazy, right? I'm like, get your information from podcasts. Like what you're doing is highlighting these experts in different fields and talking about really important information like mental health. I love that you have one on like men's mental health, because I think there's a lack of that as a space. And I think just men feeling like we don't have that maybe as much of a support as maybe women do. But I think it's just so real and raw. And when people can sit down and listen to just two people be human and share some really vulnerable information, and maybe also just really important, maybe tips and techniques and tools and whatnot, it's very healing. It's healing for you as the host, and it's healing for the other person and the listeners. I think it's a great space. That's so neat how you came into it, and it's been filling you up, and it's helped you.
Oh my
2020
God.
was just so hard, so hard.
Yes. I mean, yeah, it fills, it fills my cup. It fills my heart. I mean, coming from the heart was really, the name was more between my daughter and I having this moment where I was pretty much at my wits of lowest of low. You couldn't get any lower than that. Trying to navigate every day, having vertigo, not knowing what I was doing or how I was doing it. And I kept saying to her, it's coming from my heart. It's my heart. And that's sort of, we both stopped, and I go, well, there you go. And that was way before June 10th that we, conceived of Coming from the Heart podcast. And, but I like what you were saying too about, being authentic and sharing stories. And I think you as well absolutely are a story chaser, to share personal triumphs or not so triumphs, that the people that I have come onto the podcast are creatives or creators, musicians, producers, celebrity people, all different types of voices. But really, like I say, it doesn't really matter who the heck I'm talking to. It's that I can get to the core, of whatever the conversation is going. I think you have the ability to do that as well, to give people the space, but also show, vulnerability.
Yeah.
Where someone would go like, oh my God, I can't believe I shared that with you. I recently,
I hear that all the time.
yeah, no, because you definitely have that personality as well, Jackie. I mean, 100%.
You do too. I feel like that's why we
thank you.
vibe so well.
Oh yeah. And we totally do, because people just don't share. People don't just share with whoever. You have to have that something, whatever that something in your personality. But what I was going to say is I just recently, actually, as in yesterday, put out a podcast with this really amazing human, Jonathan Bogner. He had a heart transplant, Jackie. And I found him through a really nice friend of mine, Rena Watts Friedman, who she's been connecting me with some cool people. And what a powerful interview. I mean, I'm not here to like plug my podcast because that's not truly what I'm trying to
No,
say.
that's what this is
Yeah,
about
no,
too.
no, I'm not. But what I'm saying is that he shared stuff with me, and we talked about he got a transplant, and the guy's been through strokes and all these different situations, but his humility and his tenacity is something that we all should be taking a look at. We all get so caught up in our daily day or whatever's going on. And he had that world until he was in his 40s. I think he was 44 or 45, where he had this massive situation happen and his whole life just completely changed. So, I think it's to step back and just go, oh yeah, wait a minute. We all say stay present, as present as you possibly can be, depending upon what's going on in your life. So, but again, it's just, it's been an honor to first of all, to sit here and talk my story, but it's an honor to be a podcaster because we clearly know, or I know, you don't go in it for the money.
No, not at all. Same thing with teaching.
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet. I think that will be changing.
Oh my God.
I really think it's like the next big, I mean, it's been around for a while, but it is blowing up. Like, I think it is the next, like the media people are gravitating towards. And so the money will be there, for that time. But I think people are craving realness. They're craving authenticity. They're craving vulnerability. And we're in, I think, a place in the world where we're coming from the heart. Like, we're needing to be in that heart space. The mind can only go so far, and the mind gets us in trouble. So if we don't take, care of our heart and really share these like authentic stories and connections with people, and we just get trapped in our ego and our head, that's when we get into trouble, right? So I think that's kind of the new space that we're living in. And I think podcasting is really that essence, that media of the heart. I love your title. It's just perfect.
Thank you.
I feel like this could be something that we should be doing like in schools. And that's kind of like my last segue for like the last part is like how you envision what school should be like. I mean, you've been in so many different spaces, but like where we should be going and really giving the best, educational experience to our children and adults as well. Yeah. Anything you want to share with that?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. It's funny, like I said, I just was writing this email to this superintendent in Weehawken schools. So if anyone who's listening will know who I'm talking about. Okay. And in my email, I more or less gave my background. I said, hey, I don't have an updated resume yet. That's in the works, but it's sort of this conversation I wanted to have with him going forward based upon, I gave all my, experience and my expertise, but really at the end of the email, and to your point, what I was saying to him is more or less, how would you like to utilize my skill set? Because you're the superintendent, I've given you my story, from A to Z, everything more or less that I've been in. I didn't really mention the retail aspect, but the educational aspect up until obviously the podcast, my career coaching, more or less what I'm doing. And what his background per se is about giving kindness, thinking about kids' mental health because of all the different things that kids now, unfortunately, as we were talking on my podcast about school shootings and what's going on in the Middle East and all, and of course the pandemic. These kids have been through hell. So, if he were when he looks at my background, okay, so has all these different entities of education and experiences, whether he wants to utilize that to say, okay, well, maybe you could be part of the ESL, that aspect as a, as a supervisor or because I don't want to do this on a full-time capacity. I kind of want to be more of a consultant or bring me in as a mental health advocate as well. So, but with schools, I believe that, your trajectory is to show schools in a more holistic way.
Yeah.
And what I was trying to drive to him is that here's my package. I have my master's. I could walk in tomorrow. If you want to hire me, I sound so, yes, of course I could just walk in, but I don't want to pigeonhole myself into a specific job. I've done
Yeah.
all that. That I
Yeah.
did done. Where I am right now is in a position of really consultancy, where I could
Mhm.
use my expertise and what I know to make your district or make a situation, maybe with your high school seniors or whatever, to bring them into a different space, because we're
Mm.
living in a different type of a world as compared to when I was teaching my elementary, as
Yeah.
compared to 10 years ago. So I hope I sort of answered
Yeah,
that
no,
question.
and I think there needs to be more of a support within the school system to create these new roles if they don't already exist. And a lot of schools that I know don't have like a mental health advocate or a mental health consultant that's maybe there to do like professional development for teachers, and then be also like another role in the school that's not just like the counselor, but maybe someone who can help with, looking at working with kids on coping mechanisms, and like working with teachers to maybe teach some strategies in the classroom to help with kids dealing with stress or anxiety. Maybe looking at the curriculum, looking at the types of assignments we have, and thinking, what can we do to alleviate some of this stress? Like we're actually putting a lot on their plate. We're putting a lot on teachers' plate, and we're putting a lot on students' plate, because there's been this whole I don't know, like push to be like, we have to make up for the 3 years of loss of the pandemic. I'm like, well, you can't shove 3 years into 1 year. And
Wow.
how
Wow.
is that doing anything? It's not doing anything,
Wow.
because we're
Wow.
shoving in content, we're shoving in what we think is skills, and we're still not talking about mental health. We're still not talking about holistic education, which is kids need to learn how to have some life skills. They need to learn what we're doing right now, communicating. They need
Yeah.
interpersonal skills.
Oh
They
my
need
gosh.
stress
Yeah.
coping skills. Like I needed that when I was in school, but if I was a student now, oh my goodness, I don't even know. I had anxiety when I was in high school. I don't even know. With social media, I'd be like, mom and dad, you need to pull me out of here. I need to be like homeschool, or I need to go on like, online. I don't think I could handle all of it. Because I'm a very sensitive
I
person. So
love, you're
I
so
am very
funny.
much my emotions, everything.
I,
Um,
I'm taking notes on what you're saying, because
yeah, but I
I'm like,
think this is
oh,
needed.
this is
I think it
good. This
is.
is good. You know
We
what,
need to
Jackie?
create new roles.
Oh
We should
my
just create new
God.
roles for schools. That's what we could
Let's
do.
do this. I'm bringing you to I'll be like, well, can you hold on for a second? I want to just, conference in Jackie for a moment. Um, 'Cause she can kind of elaborate on what I'm talking about. You know why? More so because you're in this trench world.
Mm,
I was in that trench world, and you don't ever forget the trenches, because
right.
God knows it does something to your mental health when you're in it for so long. When I was in the elementary, middle school, and then of course the college institution world, which is a
Yeah.
completely different world. It's a corporation of making
Mm,
money. Clearly, it's not about the kids. Like
right.
let's call it what that situation is. That's all about money, 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 money.
Hmm.
And that really, it's sad to say, that's a lot of, I use the word trajectory of the vision of a lot of this. It's
Yeah.
money. I mean, and
Yeah.
education, I'm sorry, is second. I mean,
It
because the
is.
money really is first. I mean, there's situations now that happened at different universities where
Hmm.
certain administrators are no longer going to be part of that
Yeah.
situation any longer. And how, sometimes you need to take care of the student body and the community, and the money does come later in a lot of
Yes.
situations. But I like what you were saying about the communicative aspect,
Hmm.
because I'm going to use that. I'm using that in
Hmm.
my interview. If I have to, not interview,
Yeah.
it's the communicative, because when I was teaching communication classes, I would say, oh my God, this is not just for my international students. Everybody
Oh,
in the university should be coming to my class,
for
because
sure.
phones were in a basket or were not allowed to be turned on. And we needed to effectively learn how to communicate. And
Yeah.
they don't know how to do it. Adults don't know how to
No.
do it. Kids don't know how to do it. Interpersonal skills are
Yeah.
so needed. And then what happens, as you know, we've spoken on this in my pod, is that they go for the interview, or they go for a job, and then they don't get it, or they're on a Zoom and they're like, looking at the ceiling instead of obviously the camera. I'll share this with you, talk about stories.
Hmm.
I had a very, how do I say this? influential person come on. I wouldn't say she's celebrity-like, but she thinks she's celebrity-like. She's in the dating coach world.
Okay.
I won't say her name. And this was about 2+ years ago. And the entire time she's a millennial. Okay. So I'm not insulting all of them. And she never looked at me once the
Oh,
entire
weird.
interview. She was on her laptop the entire time. So, I
In
was
an
like,
interview for a podcast?
in an interview. In an
Oh my
interview.
gosh.
So I was like, okay, hello, basic, how do you do this? Basic communication skills.
Yeah.
We in the Western culture, I would say this to my students from day one, I don't care where the hell I was teaching, we like to have that eye contact.
Yes.
And there's a lot of countries, China or India,
Yeah, it's
we're
different.
talking all different situations, it's to be subservient, but we're talking Western culture,
Yeah.
you better start having that.
Mhm.
And that's a skill set,
It is a skill.
yeah, but back to the high school, or back to, this conversation, hopefully I'll have with the superintendent, is to really drive home or dive in, whatever word we want to use, the holistic aspect of education, the interpersonal skills, and how do we create something of newness for these
Mhm.
kids that are in a brand new world that we don't even know
Exactly.
how to even interface with them, because we don't know what to do either, because we're in that same world and they're
Exactly.
in a situation to be educated. And like
Yeah.
you were saying about, social media and all this other stuff, it's really a disaster out there.
Yeah. And they've gone through so much. The world is different. I mean, we have to just be cognizant that it's different. You're not going back to 2019.
No.
You can't just say, "Oh, the new normal is just going back to 2019." Well, it's not. Things have changed. And for some things it's changed for the better, because I think it's allowing us to have this conversation that we can't do this old system of
Right.
school anymore, where it's
Right.
just about
Right.
content. It's just
Mm.
about go to 5, 6 subject classes, and then maybe you have a PE, you have a art, you have some schools have like the home ec or the life skills. My school, we don't even have really, we just have a life skills minor, which we just started this year, which the kids were really excited about. But that, I think, like at least half of the curriculum
Yes.
should be that. Like half of the
Absolutely.
curriculum should be life skills,
Absolutely.
interpersonal skills,
Oh,
mental
absolutely.
health,
Oh,
just
yeah.
overall how you are a functioning human. There you go. There's half of it. And then you work in a couple of content areas that are
Absolutely.
key to
Oh,
have.
yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
this isn't rocket science. This isn't hard to do. But I think it's going to take having more of these conversations. And that's what I'm trying to do on this space and
Right.
talking to more people. And now you're
Yes.
giving me an idea of, now maybe I should be bold and go to schools and say, "Hey, I have an idea for like a new way of like looking at the schedule, and a new way of looking at how we can do this like 50-50, right? 50
Mhm,
life
mhm.
skills, hoping in 21st century learning, real time
Exactly.
right here.
Exactly.
And then
Exactly.
50, okay, we got your subject contents that we're not gonna like totally
Yeah,
drop
of
off,
course.
right?
Well, yeah, I mean, core content is core content.
Yeah.
Languages and English, learning and writing, but the
Yes,
communication aspect is the English part. You can sort of weave these
you
things in,
can.
to mental health and communication skills, and,
Mhm.
analytics, and computers are excessively important, and it's life skills actually really to understand
Right.
the technology world, because that's the world that we're all living in. Quite frankly, these kids are so far educated in that, just based on
Oh,
the
yeah.
fact that they're living that. And I always say I'm the alien, but they're not. Like, they're living this,
Yeah.
So, but it's to rethink. But I think part of the issue is the stagnant aspect of many school districts, which are so jaded or archaic
Mm,
in wanting
mm,
to be open to this, because at the end of the day, we always, like I was saying earlier, it's money, it's
mm.
funding, it's what parents are going to approve of or not. You have
Yeah.
to, it's different types of schooling that would be more interested in it. And that's really it. And it really kind of, I think, goes across the board from, we talked about private schools or public schools,
Mhm,
or micro schools, I think you were talking
mhm.
about last time, where that may be more openness of discussion in the
Yeah.
micro school because it's homeschool. But I think that they're incredible ideas. And what I'm focusing on is when you were saying about shoving in the content for the like,
For
what do you
3 years.
how is that? Is that something that they really think that
I
is
feel like
possible?
especially in like elementary or lower school,
Really?
where they feel like they've lost a lot of time, especially I would say areas that maybe were virtual for so long, like we weren't
Okay.
virtual that long. But like there were lots of schools across the country that were virtual for like a year and
Yeah.
a half, right?
Yeah.
Even into
Right.
2 years. And I
Yeah.
think
Sure.
they think they lost a lot, and they're not focusing on also the loss of these skills we're talking about. So
Wow.
it's like we
Wow.
should prioritize that and not necessarily
Wow.
maybe the subject areas, or
Yeah.
yes, you got to maybe like do maybe a little bit more reading intervention for those kids that might have lost that or whatnot. But I think we're still a lot of the public schools focus on standardized testing.
Well,
Get
yeah,
that out of
yeah,
the that
yeah,
needs to go.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. The standardized testing. And I remember when I used to write my horrible lesson plans that I absolutely despised and hated and cut and pasted everything, is that that's the reality. You guys can't fire me now because I'm long gone, but for doing that, but everybody does. But my point is that there's so much wasted space and wasted time and wasted creative moments of duplication of all that
Wasted
crap.
creative moments. I
Oh
like
yeah.
that. That's
Yeah,
so true.
wasted creative moments to really think about, what do these kids need? What are they going to
Yeah.
do to survive? They know that suicide, I mean, that's something that I also, through the state of New Jersey, I'm suicide ideation trained and
Mm,
trainer to be, these kids are, so many of them are at risk. So many
mhm,
situations and it doesn't matter the socioeconomic, it's everywhere. Suicide
mhm,
is in all situations. It crosses every possible border. And
mhm,
the point is that if you are not addressing the true needs of these kids, then what's going to happen? I mean,
mm,
honestly, I love what you were saying in regards to maybe what I'm possibly going to get into is to give professional development. I think that
mhm.
schools are always wanting, I mean, I think teachers after a while are like, oh God, another professional development day. Let me kill myself. But really bring in, if I could be
The
part of,
valuable.
to
Yeah.
bring in something that you're absolutely going to utilize
Yes.
information to be like, okay, you're dealing with these kids that they need help. And
Mhm,
how are we going to help them? But I think there's so many, between the curriculum standards and
mm,
all the stuff that's mandated from the state of New Jersey that you
mhm,
have to have, and you're constantly running on this treadmill, if I remember
mm.
correctly, to get it all done.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
yeah.
Well, we're going to keep fighting the good fight, I think, as a duo here. We got some really great ideas. And
Thank
so
you,
I love
Jackie.
that you've been on this podcast, I've been on your podcast, and we both are in New Jersey. So this is just like, it's just meant to be. This is awesome. Can you share your information with our
Absolutely.
listeners of how they could find you and your podcast? And
Okay.
I'll plug all that in the show notes.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Again, I love you. So happy we met on LinkedIn.
Me
As I was
too.
scrolling by, I'm happy to have connected with you on mine as well as on yours. You guys can find me at, get ready, on Instagram. It's coming_from the heart podcast. And that's probably that's the best way to get me. I'm on TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, all the socials. Let's see, coming from the heart podcast at gmail.com. If you go to Instagram, you will see all the information, and you guys can come and say hi to me and DM me whenever you'd like.
I love it. That's great. You're everywhere. Everywhere where
I
all the
am
kids
everywhere.
are.
I really,
Let's bring the kids on the show. We need to hear
we
from you.
should.
You. Yeah,
I
that would be
would,
fun.
I think we could totally, round up some of your high schoolers. Come
Yeah.
on.
They're like, I got a lot to talk about. They would love
I would
it.
love that. I would love
Yes.
that. That'd be amazing.
Well, thank you so much. I always feel like so filled up after our conversations. Like I'm just like beaming with energy. This is
Oh, thank you.
so fun.
Thank
So
you.
much
You're
fun.
awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And
You're
thanks
welcome.
everybody for listening. And just good luck to everybody on their journey of whatever that might be.